On Christmas Eve, a billionaire opens his office door to find a 6-year-old girl holding a letter from her dead mother, claiming she is his daughter, and that someone he trusts has been hiding the truth for years. The heavy wooden door creaked softly as it opened, and a small voice drifted into the warm glow of the office. "I brought you a letter from an angel." The words were so quiet that Benjamin Hale wasn't sure at first if he had imagined them. He lifted his gaze from the contract spread across his desk, expecting to see an assistant or one of the managers who were always trying to catch his attention. Instead, he saw a little girl standing hesitantly in the doorway. She looked impossibly small against the towering shelves of books and the tall windows behind her. A pale-haired child, her soft blonde curls resting on her shoulders, dressed in a simple white dress that made her seem almost ethereal. A bright red backpack hung from one arm, too large for her slight frame, as though she had carried something far heavier than it appeared. Her blue eyes, striking and innocent, observed him with a mixture of caution and determination. Benjamin slowly rose from his chair. He was a man used to commanding rooms, negotiations, entire corporations, yet something about this child made him move more carefully than he had in years. His dark hair was neatly combed, his blue suit perfectly tailored, but a subtle unease touched him now. This girl did not belong in the world of sleek offices and billion-dollar decisions. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lily," she answered, holding the envelope a little closer to her chest. "Lily Grace." The surname hit him like a quiet blow, though he did not show it. Clara's last name. A name he had forced himself not to speak aloud for years, because doing so tore open too many memories. He came closer and knelt so he could meet the girl's eyes without towering over her. "Who sent you here, Lily?" "My mom," she whispered. "She told me, if something ever happened to her, I should find a man named Ben. She said you would know what to do. She said you're kind, even if you don't remember how to be." Benjamin's throat tightened. The girl extended the envelope to him with both hands, as though handing over something sacred. He hesitated before taking it, already knowing, somehow, painfully, that once he opened it, nothing in his life would stay the same. The letter was simple. Clara's handwriting curves were still familiar, still heartbreakingly gentle. As he unfolded the paper, the room felt suddenly smaller, as though the past had slipped inside and closed the door behind it. "Ben, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with our little girl. I tried for so long to keep her safe, to raise her with love. But life has taken more from me than I could fight. I beg you, take care of her. She is the only part of us that remained. I always hoped you would meet her one day, not like this, but fate gave me no choice. Please, don't let her walk through this world alone." The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years. He pressed the letter against his knee to steady it. Clara. His Clara. The woman whose laughter had once filled entire rooms, whose leaving had hollowed out his own heart. He had never known why she had disappeared from his life so suddenly. He had buried himself in work, in ambition, in a future that seemed easier to chase than any memories of her. But now he understood. She had kept a secret. A secret that now stood quietly in his office, waiting for him to finish reading, her small hands twisted together nervously. He wiped his eyes before turning back to her, but she had already sensed everything. Children always did. She watched him with a mixture of hope and fear, as though the wrong expression on his face might make the world collapse. "Lily," he said softly, "do you know who I am to you?" She shook her head. "Mom said, you'd explain." The disbelief settled in slowly, spreading through him like warmth and cold at once. His daughter. His daughter had walked into his office on a quiet evening, carrying the burden of the woman he once loved and the future he had never expected to have. The air in the room felt different now, heavier with what had been revealed and lighter with what might still be possible. He reached out his hand, uncertain, almost afraid of frightening her. She hesitated only a moment before placing her small hand into his, trusting him in a way that broke him open completely. In that moment, Benjamin Hale understood that nothing he had built, nothing he had fought for, carried as much weight as the little girl standing before him. His life had been measured in profit and power, in success and structures. But now, holding the hand of a child he had never known existed, he realized that everything was about to change in ways he could not yet comprehend. And for the first time in years, he wanted it to. The sound of footsteps echoed sharply against the polished marble floor, cutting through the quiet stillness of the office before Benjamin even had a chance to process everything the letter had revealed. Lily's small fingers were still curled around his hand when the door swung open without a knock, and Sabrina Miller entered with her usual confidence, pretending the world itself bowed to her presence. Her red dress shimmered with every step, a deliberate contrast to the neutral tones of the room, as if she demanded the space reshape itself around her. But the moment her eyes landed on the little girl beside him, her expression tightened into something sharp and displeased. "Ben," she began, her voice clipped and irritated, "why is there a child in your office? We have the investors' dinner in an hour," and she stopped mid-sentence, narrowing her eyes at Lily as though the girl's mere existence was an inconvenience. "Who is she?" Lily instinctively shrank closer to Benjamin, her fingers gripping his more firmly. He straightened, placing himself slightly in front of her in a gesture that came more naturally than he expected. He could feel Sabrina's gaze shifting between them, calculating, impatient. "This is Lily," he said quietly, though the weight in his voice made it impossible to miss the significance. "My daughter." The silence that followed was thick and cold. Sabrina blinked, once, then again, as if her mind refused to accept what she had just heard. She took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply, and her perfectly manicured hand flew to her waist. "I'm sorry," she said with a thin smile that had nothing warm in it, "I must have misheard you." "You're what?" "My daughter," he repeated. The words felt new and raw in his mouth, but they also felt right. The smile vanished. Her mask cracked instantly, revealing frustration and something darker beneath it. "Ben, this isn't funny. You can't just declare that some random child is yours. Do you understand how ridiculous this looks? How it affects both of us?" "Sabrina, stop." He held the letter at his side, gripping it hard enough to wrinkle the paper. "This isn't up for debate. She is Clara's. And she is mine." At the mention of Clara, Sabrina stiffened, and for a heartbeat her eyes flashed with something ugly, jealousy, anger, maybe fear of losing control. "Clara? That woman from years ago? You told me that relationship was over, that she disappeared from your life. And now suddenly she's left you a child." Her voice rose, shrill and cutting. "Ben, do you realize what this will do to your reputation? To the company? To our future?" "Our future," he echoed, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. "Sabrina, this child has lost her mother. She came here alone. She had nowhere else to go. And that is somehow our problem," she snapped, not even trying to conceal the disdain dripping from her tone. She glanced at Lily as though assessing a stain on an expensive coat. "We're getting married in 2 months. I'm not going to play stepmother to a 6-year-old who came out of nowhere. I refuse." Lily's blue eyes dimmed, and she clutched her backpack even tighter. Benjamin felt something inside him twist painfully at seeing fear replace the hope she'd shown only minutes earlier. "Sabrina," he said, quieter now but dangerously firm, "be careful with what you say." "I'm being realistic," she insisted, folding her arms. "You have responsibilities. A public image. A fiancé who has stood by your side for years. You don't get to throw all of that away because some woman from your past dropped a child at your doorstep." "She didn't drop her," he said through clenched teeth. "She died." For a moment, Sabrina faltered. But compassion did not follow, only irritation mixed with a selfish kind of concern. "Well, that's tragic," she replied coldly, "but it doesn't mean you can keep her. There are systems for children like this. Agencies. Guardians. Whatever. You don't need to involve yourself." Benjamin felt a flare of anger unlike anything he had experienced in a long time. He turned fully toward Lily, who looked up at him with trembling uncertainty, and he knew there was only one answer. "She's staying with me," he said. Sabrina's face twisted. "Are you insane? Think about what you're saying. This child will drain your time, your energy, your resources. Do you really think investors will trust a man who suddenly reveals he's been hiding a daughter? This is going to ruin everything we've worked for." "You're talking about my daughter," he said sharply, each word heavy with warning. "And I'm talking about your future," she shot back. "Our future. Or have you forgotten we're supposed to build a life together?" Benjamin took a slow breath, steadying himself. "If having Lily here is something you can't accept, then perhaps we don't have the same idea of what a future is." For a moment, Sabrina simply stared at him, as though she couldn't believe he would dare challenge her. Then her eyes hardened. "So that's it," she whispered angrily. "You choose her over me?" He didn't hesitate. "I choose what's right." Sabrina let out a bitter laugh, grabbed her clutch from the table, and stormed toward the door. "Then enjoy your new life, Ben. Because you've just thrown away everything else." The door slammed behind her, sending a shudder through the room that lingered even after she was gone. Benjamin looked down at Lily, whose small hand was still wrapped in his. She searched his face with a quiet vulnerability that made his chest tighten. "Did she leave because of me?" she asked softly. He knelt again, brushing a stray blonde curl from her forehead. "No, Lily. She left because she didn't understand what truly matters." "And what matters?" she whispered. "You," he said without hesitation. "You matter." As he held her close, the world he once knew, cold, structured, predictable, began to crumble. Yet for the first time, he didn't feel fear. He felt purpose. And he knew that nothing Sabrina had said could ever compare to the weight of the little girl now standing in the center of his life. The house felt impossibly quiet after Sabrina's departure, as though her absence had drained the air of its tension and left behind a fragile stillness. Benjamin guided Lily through the hallway, moving slowly so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed by the vastness of the place. The mansion had always been immaculate, polished, and cold, its order a reflection of the life he had built for himself, one where emotions were contained and personal attachments were kept at arm's length. Now, with a 6-year-old girl clutching her red backpack and walking hesitantly beside him, the space felt foreign even to him. It wasn't the grandeur that intimidated Lily, it was the uncertainty of belonging. He brought her into the living room, where the soft gold light from the chandeliers warmed the space. "You can sit wherever you like," he said gently, though he realized too late the absurdity of offering such freedom to a child who had never stepped foot inside the house. Lily perched on the very edge of the large sofa, almost afraid to disturb the cushions, her legs dangling above the floor. For a moment Benjamin simply watched her, noticing how she glanced around with shy curiosity, at the tall windows, the fireplace, the paintings on the walls. She didn't seem impressed, she seemed lost. "Lily," he said as he sat next to her, leaving a respectful distance so she wouldn't feel trapped, "did your mother ever tell you anything about me? About who I was to her?" The girl shook her head, staring at her hands. "She said you were kind once," she murmured. "And that you loved her. But she didn't talk about it much. When I asked, she would smile and say the past is a place we don't live in anymore." He felt the words like a quiet wound reopening. Clara had always spoken poetically even when she hurt. He had not been there to see that pain, nor the strength she must have shown raising a child alone. "Did she ever tell you why she didn't reach out to me?" he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted the answer. No, Lily said, lifting her eyes. She only said that I would understand someday. And then she told me your name. She made me repeat it a lot, so I wouldn't forget. She said, if anything happens to me, you must find him. He will help you. He won't leave you alone. Benjamin swallowed hard, his chest tightening with a combination of grief and guilt. He had spent years convincing himself that Clara had simply walked away because their worlds didn't fit together. The truth, whatever it was, had been much heavier and much more painful, and now the consequences of that silence sat before him in the shape of a child who had nowhere else to go. Lily, he said softly, how long have you been on your own? The girl hesitated, then pulled the straps of the backpack into her lap. Since the hospital, she whispered. After Mom didn't wake up anymore. They said someone would come for me, but I didn't know them. Mom told me to find you, not strangers. So I left. You left the hospital alone. His voice cracked despite his effort to stay calm. She nodded. How did you get here? I took the bus, she said, as though this had been an ordinary adventure. I had money in my backpack. Mom saved it for emergencies. She wrote your address on a paper and put it inside my pocket. She told me never to lose it. Benjamin felt a surge of horror at the thought of a grieving child navigating the city unprotected, but he forced himself not to frighten her with his reaction. Instead he reached for her backpack. May I? He asked. She nodded, and he opened it carefully. Inside were only a few things: a folded blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, a small stuffed rabbit with one ear bent, a tin box containing coins and crumpled bills, a water bottle, and a packet of crackers. Carefully tucked into a side pocket was the handwritten address, now worn from her journey. It was everything she owned in the world. He exhaled slowly and closed the backpack. You were very brave, he said, though the thought alone made his heart ache. But you shouldn't have had to be. Lily's voice wavered. Did I do something wrong? Should I not have come? He moved closer, shaking his head. No. You did exactly what your mother wanted. You came to me, and I'm glad you did. Her lips trembled with relief, and she leaned slightly toward him, as though testing whether it was allowed. He placed a careful arm around her, and after a moment's hesitation she leaned fully into his side, small and tired and finally letting herself rest. The trust she gave so easily overwhelmed him, it was a gift he didn't feel he deserved. Are you going to send me away like the lady said? She asked quietly, not looking up. His jaw tightened. No, Lily. I'm not sending you anywhere. But she said I don't fit, Lily added, her voice tiny. She said you have a future that doesn't have room for me. He closed his eyes briefly, realizing how deeply those careless, cruel words had cut. She was wrong, he said gently but firmly. Sometimes grown-ups care too much about the wrong things. But I care about you. And I won't leave you. Not now. Not ever. Lily nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I just didn't want to be alone. You're not alone anymore, he promised. As she settled against him, the weight of the past pressed heavily on Benjamin's shoulders. He had missed 6 years of her life, 6 years he could never get back. He didn't know how to be a father, didn't know what Lily needed beyond safety and comfort, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would not fail her the way life had failed her mother. He looked at the letter in his hand, Clara's handwriting slowly drying where his tears had touched the paper. Whatever mistakes had been made, whatever truths had been hidden, this little girl beside him was the one thing that still connected him to Clara's memory. And he would honor that connection with everything he had. As Lily leaned quietly against his side, Benjamin realized that the threads of his past had not been cut, they had been waiting to be rewoven. And now, with this small, brave child holding onto him, he finally had the chance to begin. Benjamin had expected resistance from the outside world, questions, whispers, speculation, but he hadn't anticipated how quickly the news of Lily's existence would ignite a firestorm. It happened only a few days after he took her into his home. He had been trying to create a sense of stability for her, letting her explore the rooms, adjusting his schedule so he could be present, learning small things like how she liked her hot chocolate or which stories helped her fall asleep. For a brief moment he allowed himself to believe that the chaos had quieted. But chaos never stayed quiet when Sabrina felt threatened. It started with a carefully crafted rumor that spread through the corporate circles like a spark in dry grass. Some unnamed source had come forward with information suggesting that Benjamin Hale, one of the most prominent figures in the industry, had been hiding a child for years and was guilty of misleading shareholders by failing to disclose his complicated personal history. The accusation had no legal foundation, but it created doubt, and doubt was often far more destructive than truth. Within hours, the board of directors began demanding explanations. Some members personally trusted Benjamin, but trust was fragile when reputations and money were involved. By the time Benjamin stepped into his office that morning, his assistant looked pale, holding a stack of messages that hadn't stopped piling up since sunrise. "Sir," she said nervously, "the board wants an emergency meeting. They say it concerns recent developments in your personal life." He didn't need clarification. He could practically smell Sabrina's fingerprints on every word. Before he could respond, he heard the soft patter of footsteps behind him. Lily stood in the doorway, wearing a sweater he had bought her 2 days ago, the sleeves still a little too long. She held the end of one sleeve between her fingers, sensing tension even if she didn't understand its source. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. Benjamin forced a steady breath. "Yes," he said, crossing to her and crouching down. "But I have a few things I need to take care of. You'll stay with Emily today, all right? She'll make sure you're safe and comfortable." Lily nodded, though a flicker of worry touched her eyes. She didn't ask if he was leaving, she simply whispered, "Will you come back?" "Always," he promised, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. But his heart tightened as he stood to leave. Lily had already endured too much uncertainty, and he hated that the world was dragging her into another storm. The boardroom was buzzing by the time he arrived. Conversations fell into sharp silence as he entered, and a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward him, some sympathetic, others cool, and a few openly judgmental. At the far end of the table sat Charles Whitmore, the chairman, clearing his throat with a gravity that suggested he believed this moment would define the company's future. "Benjamin," Charles began, "we want to address the allegations that have surfaced. The public believes you were hiding a child for 6 years. Some shareholders are concerned that this situation could destabilize the company's reputation." Benjamin took his seat without flinching. "I never hid a child. I only learned of her existence days ago." "Yet the rumors claim otherwise," Charles continued. "And there is talk that the child may not be yours at all. That you may be attempting to manipulate public sympathy." The insinuation made Benjamin's jaw clench. "Are you accusing me of lying about my own daughter?" "We are asking questions that the public will also ask," Charles replied, his voice carefully neutral. "We need a statement that distances the company from this situation until things are clarified." Benjamin understood what that meant. They wanted him to step away, to silence himself, to treat Lily as a liability rather than a human being. And he knew precisely who had orchestrated this. Sabrina had moved quickly, tapping into the board members' desire to keep the business spotless, perfectly curated, free from scandal. She had weaponized their ambitions the same way she tried to weaponize his. He straightened, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "Lily is a child who just lost her mother," he said. "She is innocent. I will not deny her, nor pretend she is not mine simply because it is convenient for you." Before Charles could respond, another director leaned forward. "Ben, you must see how this looks. A child appears out of nowhere. A woman from your past conveniently leaves her with you right when the company is negotiating a major international deal. It seems orchestrated. Some are saying this may be an attempt to extort you. Benjamin felt something inside him snap with quiet fury. Clara never asked me for a single dollar, he said tightly. She kept Lily hidden because she believed it was what she needed to do. I failed them once. I will not fail again. Charles sighed, exchanging uncertain glances with the others. In light of the circumstances, we may need to involve legal authorities to verify custody and paternity. If the mother left no formal documentation. There is a letter, Benjamin said, placing Clara's folded note on the table. And my decision stands. Lily stays with me. The room shifted. Some members softened, others hardened. But none of them said what he feared the most, that he had to choose between the company he built and the daughter he had just found. The meeting dragged on for nearly 2 hours, circling around concerns, liabilities, and optics. By the time he left the room, tension coiled in his spine like a drawn wire. He knew the rumors wouldn't die easily. Sabrina wasn't finished. Later that evening, when he returned home, Lily sat curled on the living room rug with her stuffed rabbit and a coloring book. She looked up immediately when she heard him, relief washing over her face. You came back, she whispered. Of course I did, he said, and this time he wasn't pretending to be calm. The moment he sat beside her, she climbed into his lap as naturally as breathing, resting her head against his chest. Her small body trembled slightly, telling him she had been afraid to hope too much. She didn't ask about the meeting or the grown-ups who doubted her. She didn't ask if the world wanted to take her away. She just held on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world full of shifting shadows. And Benjamin realized she wasn't wrong. He had become her anchor, and she had become his reason to fight. As he wrapped his arms around her, he understood that whatever battles lay ahead, legal, professional, personal, he would face them all. Because losing Lily now was not an option. Not for him. Not for her. Not anymore. Benjamin hadn't planned to search through Clara's belongings so soon, but the weight of the board's doubts lingered in his mind long after the meeting ended. He knew Clara hadn't lied to him, he knew Lily was his daughter. But knowing wasn't enough when the world demanded proof. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep curled against the large pillow he had bought her, he found himself drawn to the small suitcase Emily had brought from the hospital, a suitcase containing everything Clara had left behind. He carried it into his study, placing it gently on the desk as though it held something fragile. In a way, it did. He opened the case slowly. The faint scent of lavender drifted into the room, the same scent Lily's blanket carried, a scent he recognized from long ago. He swallowed down the ache that rose in his chest. Inside lay a collection of small, ordinary things that suddenly felt extraordinary: neatly folded clothes, a few photographs, a worn notebook with a pressed flower inside, a delicate silver necklace he remembered gifting Clara years ago. He brushed his thumb along the cool metal, realizing she had kept it all this time. Beneath the clothes was a stack of documents: Lily's birth certificate, medical forms, school notes. But the last item, tucked beneath everything else, was what caught his attention. A leather journal tied with a faded ribbon. He hesitated before untying it, sensing instinctively that whatever lay inside would change him. The first page held Clara's handwriting, still familiar in its looping elegance. She had always written as though her thoughts flowed in one breath, unguarded and graceful. He began to read, expecting memories, perhaps reflections on raising their daughter alone. What he found instead was a truth that struck him like a blow. Clara had never left him freely. She described the months leading up to her disappearance, how she had begun receiving anonymous messages threatening to expose a secret that would ruin Benjamin forever. At first she dismissed them, thinking they were misguided attempts at intimidation from business rivals. But the threats escalated. Someone called her employer, claiming she was involved in financial misconduct. Someone left a note at her apartment door with details only a person stalking her would know. Then the messages shifted, targeting not her reputation but her safety. She wrote about seeing the same unfamiliar car outside her workplace, about footsteps following her at night, about the terror of not knowing who was watching or why. And finally, on one of the later pages, she revealed the name of the person she suspected. Sabrina. Benjamin's breath left him in a rush. At first the disbelief washed over him, but it didn't last. As he kept reading, the pieces fell into place with chilling clarity. Clara had overheard one of Sabrina's conversations the year before she disappeared. Sabrina, who at the time was only an ambitious consultant with connections to influential families, had openly discussed a plan to dismantle competitors by manipulating their personal lives. Clara hadn't taken it seriously until the threats began. In her final entries, Clara confessed she believed Sabrina's motivation was simple yet devastating. If Clara remained in Benjamin's life, Sabrina's own hopes of rising in status would be blocked. So she found a way to push Clara out, not directly, but through fear, through a campaign designed to isolate and silence. The last few pages were the most painful. Clara discovered she was pregnant during the height of the threats. She wrote about sitting on the floor of her apartment, staring at the test and realizing that this child would never be safe if she stayed near Benjamin. She couldn't risk Sabrina finding out. She couldn't risk her unborn baby being harmed in a battle she didn't know how to fight. So she left, disappearing from his life without explanation, hoping distance would protect Lily from whatever danger surrounded her. Benjamin closed the journal for a moment, pressing his fingertips to his eyes. The anger that rose in him wasn't loud or explosive, it was the kind that tightened slowly and thoroughly, leaving no room for doubt. Sabrina had torn Clara from him long before he knew how much he stood to lose. She had destroyed the life he could have had, the life that now flickered before him in the form of a sleeping child upstairs. He forced himself to keep reading. In one of the final entries, Clara wrote about her illness. She had been diagnosed with a condition that progressed rapidly, leaving her with little strength and even less time. She wrote about her fear of dying before Lily was old enough to understand the truth. She wrote about how deeply she wished she could tell Benjamin everything, but fear of Sabina's influence and power still held her back. She wrote about the guilt she carried, knowing he would one day discover Lily and blame himself for not being there. She ended the entry with a plea. The same plea she had written in the letter he received: "If I cannot protect her any longer, please do what I no longer can." When he reached the last page, Benjamin closed the journal and sat back in his chair, letting the silence wash over him. His entire understanding of the past had been rewritten in a few pages of Clara's trembling handwriting. It wasn't abandonment, or indifference, or a dying love that had separated them, it was fear. Fear created by a woman he trusted. Fear that Clara endured alone to keep their child safe. He wished he could speak to Clara now, tell her she wasn't alone, tell her she hadn't needed to carry everything herself. He wished he could apologize for not protecting her from something he never even knew existed. But she was gone. And the only thing he could do now was ensure that Lily would never live under the shadow of that same fear. A soft sound at the doorway pulled him from his thoughts. Lily stood there rubbing her eyes, still half asleep, the stuffed rabbit dangling from her hand. "I woke up," she whispered. "I didn't know where you were." He rose immediately, crossing the room to her. "I'm here," he said, lifting her gently into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, trusting him without question. "Were you reading something?" she murmured. "Yes," he answered quietly. "Something important. Something your mother wanted me to understand." Lily didn't know what he meant, but she nodded, already drifting back to sleep against him. As Benjamin carried her upstairs, the truth from Clara's journal settled inside him with the weight of a promise. There would be no more secrets, no more threats, no more shadows creeping into the life of this child. Whatever Sabrina had started years ago ended now. He would protect Lily with everything he had. Not because Clara asked it of him, but because he finally understood that Lily wasn't just his responsibility, she was his family. And he had no intention of losing her the way he lost Clara. Not again. Not ever. Benjamin requested the emergency board meeting himself this time, not because he felt uncertain, but because he finally had clarity. Clara's journal had stripped away every remaining illusion, and the truth inside it sharpened his focus into something cold and deliberate. He walked into the boardroom the next morning carrying a folder under his arm, and although his expression remained composed, there was a gravity to him that made even the most outspoken directors fall quiet. He was no longer defending himself. He was preparing to expose the one person who had manipulated his life from the shadows for years. The room filled slowly, everyone taking their usual seats, murmuring to one another about Sabrina's recent accusations and the press inquiries piling up at the company's door. When Sabrina arrived, she walked in with the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. She wore another flawless dress, her hair perfectly arranged, her steps graceful and calculated. She didn't take a seat immediately, she moved closer to Benjamin as though she expected him to feel compelled to acknowledge her. "I heard you called this meeting," she said softly, her voice dripping with carefully measured concern. "I hope you're finally ready to address the damage that situation with the child is causing." Benjamin didn't answer her. Instead, he looked at Charles, who took the cue and cleared his throat. "Now that everyone is here, let us begin. Benjamin, you requested this meeting. What exactly do you want to present?" Benjamin rose from his chair and placed the folder on the table. "I want to clarify the truth about recent events," he said, but the tone of his voice told everyone that he intended far more than clarification. "The rumors circulating about Lily's parentage are not accidental. They were engineered, and I now know who engineered them." Sabrina stiffened slightly, but her expression stayed neutral. "Ben, if this is another attempt to avoid accountability—" "It isn't," he cut in, calm but razor-sharp. "It's an attempt to reveal the real source of manipulation. A source that goes back years." A murmur rippled across the table. Benjamin opened the folder and began placing documents along the polished surface, copies of threatening notes Clara had saved, records of anonymous calls, dates aligning with Sabrina's consulting work, and finally, excerpts transcribed from Clara's journal where she described overhearing Sabrina discussing her intentions. He didn't read aloud at first. He let the directors absorb the evidence. Several leaned forward, brows furrowed deeply. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Sabrina's face, however, began to lose its composure. Her confident posture faltered. Finally, Benjamin spoke. "Years ago, Clara disappeared from my life without a word. I believed I had failed her somehow. I believed she had chosen to leave. But Clara did not walk away from me freely. She was forced out, manipulated, intimidated, and threatened." He picked up one page and read it aloud. Clara wrote, "I heard Sabrina say that removing me from Ben's life is the only way she can secure her future. She said people like me are replaceable, but Ben is not. I don't think she knows I overheard, but I am terrified." The room fell into shocked silence. Benjamin looked directly at Sabrina now. "You orchestrated threats that drove her away. You endangered her. You indirectly endangered our daughter. And now, years later, you tried to do it again, this time by using lies to undermine my relationship with Lily and threaten my position here." Sabrina's composure finally cracked, her voice rose sharply. "This is absurd. You can't seriously think I had anything to do with those lies your precious Clara wrote. She was unstable. She was emotional. She probably imagined it." "She imagined the threatening phone calls?" Benjamin asked, his tone still steady but dangerous. "She imagined the anonymous notes? She imagined being followed? She imagined hearing your voice when you didn't know she was around?" Sabrina opened her mouth, then closed it again. The directors watched her closely, the suspicion in their eyes growing with every second she failed to respond. One of the senior board members spoke up. "Ms. Miller, can you explain why your consulting firm was in contact with several of the companies Clara worked for during the same months these incidents occurred?" Another followed. "And why her supervisor reported receiving an anonymous complaint about her only days after your visit to their office?" Sabrina's face drained of color. "This is a setup," she hissed. "He's twisting everything. I am the victim here. He is trying to blame me because he doesn't want to face the consequences of dragging a random child into his home." "Her name is Lily," Benjamin said, finally raising his voice just enough for the force of it to silence her. "She is my daughter. And she is not a tool for your ambition or a threat to your status." Sabrina's confident mask was gone now, replaced by panic. She looked around the room, but there were no allies left. Even those who had once admired her ambition could see the truth, or at the very least, the danger, behind her actions. Charles leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Sabrina, given the nature of this evidence and your behavior in recent days, you are hereby removed from all consulting roles within this company. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." "No," she whispered, stepping back as two guards approached. "You can't do this to me. Ben, say something. You owe me this much." Benjamin shook his head. "I owe you nothing." As the guards gently but firmly guided her toward the door, her voice echoed in disbelief and fury, but no one intervened. When the door shut behind her, the silence she left behind felt cleaner somehow, as if a long-standing shadow had finally been lifted. The board members turned back to Benjamin, some embarrassed, others openly remorseful for having doubted him. Charles spoke carefully. "It appears we underestimated the situation. We apologize for the pressure placed on you during a very difficult time. And for the record, the company will fully support you as you transition into your responsibilities as a father." Benjamin nodded, though his mind had already drifted to Lily. She was upstairs, probably coloring or arranging her stuffed rabbit the way she liked, blissfully unaware of the storm that had been raging around her. When he stepped out of the boardroom and into the quiet hallway, the intensity of the confrontation finally eased from his shoulders. He realized something profound: he had not fought for his reputation, or his company, or his pride. He had fought for Lily. And in doing so, he had protected Clara's memory as well. He left the building without a backward glance, eager for the first time in years to go home, not to a mansion, but to a little girl who trusted him more than anyone else in the world. The days that followed Sabrina's removal felt strangely gentle, as if the house itself sensed the shift and softened around the small girl now living within its walls. For years Benjamin's home had been a monument to order and ambition, its sharp lines and expensive furnishings reflecting a life devoted entirely to work. But Lily's presence began to alter the atmosphere in ways he never expected. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly: a tiny pair of shoes left near the front door, a pink hairbrush on the bathroom counter, a stuffed rabbit resting against fine silk cushions that were never meant for toys. Yet each small change filled the house with a warmth it had always lacked. Benjamin discovered very quickly that raising a child required a kind of patience he had never practiced, but also that it brought a sense of purpose that no corporate victory had ever given him. Lily woke early, padding softly through the hallways until she found him in the kitchen, usually attempting to make breakfast that didn't come from a catered menu. She would sit at the counter swinging her legs while he scrambled eggs with the awkward concentration of a man who had spent more time negotiating international deals than cracking eggshells. Sometimes she giggled when he burned something or dropped a utensil, and the sound, light, unburdened, genuine, began to chip away at the reserve that had defined him for so long. Every day brought new discoveries about her. She loved drawing more than anything, disappearing into her imagination with colored pencils and sketch pads he bought in every shade available. She arranged her toys in neat rows but always kept the rabbit closest, carrying it tucked under her arm wherever she went. She asked questions constantly, the kind that made him pause and think in a way he hadn't since childhood. questions about the stars, about why adults forget to smile, about whether angels really watch people when they're sad. She rarely asked about her mother, but when she did, she spoke with a quiet reverence that made Benjamin treat every memory of Clara as something fragile and precious. One evening, after a long day of meetings that drained him in all the familiar ways, he returned home to find Lily sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. Papers were spread around her like petals, and she was completely absorbed in her drawing. When she looked up and saw him, her face brightened as if his arrival meant something more than the end of her day. She jumped up and ran to him, tugging his sleeve with excitement. "I made something," she announced. "I want to show you." He followed her back to the sea of papers. In the center lay a large sheet filled with vibrant colors. The drawing showed a tall man in a blue suit and a small girl in a white dress standing side by side, holding hands. Behind them was a big house with glowing windows, and above it were stars shaped like hearts. He recognized the man immediately, not only because of the suit but because she had given him the same deep blue eyes she stared into every day. The girl beside him had golden hair and the same joyful smile Lily wore when she felt safe. "This is us," she said proudly. "I drew it because it feels like a real picture now. You and me." Benjamin felt something inside him loosen in a way that was both painful and healing. He sat down beside her and picked up the drawing carefully. "It's beautiful," he said, and he meant it in a way that reached far deeper than he could express. "You're very talented." Lily shrugged in a shy, pleased way. "Mom used to say drawing is how we keep the people we love close. So I wanted to keep you close." He blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the statement and the weight it carried. He had spent so many years guarding his emotions, managing his image, keeping everything locked behind polished surfaces. Yet here was a child who offered her affection without hesitation and expected nothing but presence in return. He reached out and gently pulled her onto his lap. She fit there perfectly, her head settling against his chest as if she had always known that space belonged to her. "Do you like living here, Lily?" he asked quietly, brushing a curl from her forehead. She nodded without hesitation. "Yes. It feels like a place where I can breathe again." She paused, then added in a smaller voice, "Sometimes I get scared that someone might take me away. But then I remember you said you won't let that happen." "I won't," he answered, the promise flowing from him instinctively. "You're safe here. You're safe with me." The child relaxed against him, trusting him with her whole heart, and he realized just how much responsibility that trust carried. He knew he couldn't give Lily back the years she'd lost. He couldn't undo Clara's suffering or erase the shadows that had shaped their lives. But he could build something new, something steady, something honest, something that honored the love Clara had left behind. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the room he had decorated just for her, Benjamin stood by her door watching the rise and fall of her small breaths. He thought about how easily she had fit into his life, like a missing piece he never knew he lacked until she placed herself there. Her drawings now decorated the hallway, her laughter echoed down staircases where silence once reigned, her presence filled spaces he had never realized were empty. He understood then that he was no longer a man living alone in a mansion. He was a father. Not by obligation, not by circumstance, but by choice. And with that choice came a sense of belonging he had spent years believing he didn't deserve. As he turned to leave Lily's room, he noticed one more drawing taped to her nightstand. It was simpler than the others, a stick-figure family, just two people, but they stood close together, smiling. Above them Lily had written in uneven letters, "My dad is home now." For the first time in a very long time, Benjamin felt that the words were true. The night before Christmas arrived with a soft hush that settled over the house like a warm blanket. Snow fell outside in slow, drifting flakes, coating the world in a quiet that felt almost sacred. Inside, the mansion glowed with gentle lights that reflected off the garlands and ornaments Lily had helped hang. Benjamin watched her admire the tree she had decorated herself, some ornaments perfectly placed, others crooked or clustered together, but all reflecting her joy. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a place where life was finally happening. Lily hummed softly as she adjusted a star-shaped ornament near the bottom of the tree. She wore a soft white nightgown, her blonde hair brushing her shoulders like threads of winter sunlight. At one point she stepped back and studied the tree with narrowed eyes, then nodded to herself, apparently satisfied. Benjamin couldn't help smiling at how seriously she took her task. When she noticed him watching, she beamed and rushed across the room to take his hand. "Can I show you something?" she asked, her voice filled with an excitement that made her words dance. "Of course," he said, letting her lead him to the chair near the fireplace. She climbed onto the chair, then onto his lap, settling as if it were her natural place. She held something in her hands, a small envelope slightly worn around the edges. When she placed it in his palm, her expression shifted into a tenderness he knew she inherited from her mother. "I found this," she said softly. "It was in my backpack, inside a little pocket I didn't know about. It's from Mom. It has your name." Benjamin's breath caught as he looked at the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's, familiar loops and soft curves that carried memories of a life he once thought lost forever. He swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment press into his chest. Lily curled against him, waiting with a quiet patience that reflected her trust in him. He opened the envelope carefully, as though afraid the paper might crumble under his touch. Inside was a letter, written in Clara's thoughtful script. He began to read slowly, letting each word settle. "Ben, if you're reading this, then my time has run out sooner than I hoped. I wanted so many things: to see Lily grow, to watch her first day of school, to tell her stories before bed, to let her know she was loved by both her parents, not just one. But life rarely grants us everything we ask for. If she has found you, it means she followed my words bravely. Please cherish her. She is the brightest part of my heart and the only thing I leave behind. Understand that I left you not because I stopped loving you, but because fear drove me away. I thought distance would protect her, but I realize now that only you truly can. Let her laugh. Let her feel safe. Let her know she is never alone. And Ben, forgive me for keeping her from you. Forgive me for leaving without a farewell. You were the greatest love I ever had. If I cannot be there to watch her life unfold, I pray that you will be. Take care of her, and take care of yourself. With love that never faded, Clara." By the time he finished, the words blurred through the sting of tears he could no longer hold back. He rested the letter gently on his knee and closed his eyes, letting the grief, gratitude, and love wash over him all at once. Clara's voice felt present in the room, as if she were standing beside him, watching the snow drift behind the windows. Lily looked up at him, concern flickering in her blue eyes. "Are you sad?" she whispered. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "A little," he admitted. "But also, very grateful. Your mother loved you more than anything. And she wanted you to find me." Lily traced the edge of the letter with her tiny finger. "Do you think she can see us?" "I do," he said without hesitation. "I think she's watching us right now. And I think she's smiling." Lily leaned her head against his chest, comforted by the thought. "I miss her," she murmured. "So do I," he said. "But missing someone means they mattered. And your mother mattered very much." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. Then Lily lifted her head again and studied him with a seriousness that always surprised him. "Daddy," she said, "you didn't have a family before. But now you do. It's me and you. And Mom is our angel." The simplicity of her words broke something open inside him. He looked at her, this small miracle who had turned his life upside down in the best possible way, and realized how profoundly true her statement was. He had spent years building wealth, success, and walls around his emotions. But Lily had walked right through those walls with her drawings, her trust, and her unwavering belief that he was good enough to love. He hugged her tightly, unable to speak for a moment. She nestled into him, warm and content, holding her stuffed rabbit between them. Outside, the wind stirred the snow into gentle swirls, and inside, the lights on the tree flickered softly as if responding to the emotion in the room. Benjamin finally whispered, "You're the greatest gift I have ever received." Lily smiled sleepily against his shoulder. "And you're mine." Later, when he carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed, she held his hand until her eyes slowly drifted closed. He lingered, watching her breathe, understanding with absolute clarity that his life had been forever altered, not by scandal or loss, but by love he never expected to find in the aftermath of everything. When he stepped back into the hallway, he glanced at the Christmas lights glowing softly across the landing. For the first time he felt a sense of peace settle over him, not the hollow quiet of isolation, but the warmth of belonging. Clara's letter rested in his pocket, a final message from the past urging him toward the future. And he knew then, with certainty, that this Christmas was not just a holiday. It was a beginning. His daughter had brought him back to life. His heart, long dormant, felt full again. And somewhere, whether in memory or something greater, Clara was watching over them, proud of the family that had finally found one another. A true miracle, wrapped not in grand gestures but in a little girl's courage and a love that had survived even death. He turned off the lights, closed Lily's door gently, and whispered into the quiet hallway, "We're going to be okay."